Chapter 33. I was given no time to doze off. I had not been there 5 minutes before I heard a rustle, and simultaneously smelt the sandalwood perfume. I pretended to be asleep. The rustle came closer. I heard the tiny crepitation of pine needles. Her feet were just behind my head. There was a louder rustle. She had sat down and very close behind me. I thought she would drop a cone, tickle my nose, but in a very low voice she began to recite Shakespeare. Be not afeard. The isle is full of noises, sounds and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ears, and sometimes voices that, if I then had waked after long sleep, will make me sleep again. And then, in dreaming, the clouds methought would open and show riches ready to drop upon me, that, when I waked, I cried to dream again. All the time I was silent and kept my eyes closed. She teased the words, giving them double meanings. Her dry, sweet voice, the wind in the pines above. She ended, but I kept my eyes closed. I murmured, Go on. A spirit of his comes to torment you. I opened my eyes. A fiendish green and black face with protuberant fire-red eyes glared down at me. I twisted up. She was holding a Chinese carnival mask on a stick in her left hand. I saw the scar. She had changed into a long-sleeved white blouse and a long gray skirt, and her hair was tied back by a black velvet bow. I pushed the mask aside. You make a rotten Caliban. Then perhaps you shall take the part. I was rather hoping for Ferdinand. She half raised the mask again and quizzed me over the top of it with a decided dryness. We were evidently still playing games, but in a different, rather franker key. Are you sure you have the skill for it? What I lack in skill I'll try to make up for in feeling. A tiny mocking glint stayed in her eyes. Forbidden? By Prospero? Perhaps. That's how it began in Shakespeare, by being forbidden. She looked down, although of course his Miranda was a lot more innocent, and his Ferdinand. Except I tell you the truth, and you tell me nothing but lies. Her eyes were still downcast, but she bit her lips. I have told you some truths, such as that black dog you so kindly warned me about, I added quickly, and for God's sake don't ask me which black dog. She put her hands round her enskirted knees and leant back and stared into the trees behind me. She was wearing absurd black lace-up boots. The echo now was of some antiquated village schoolroom, or perhaps of Mrs. Pankhurst, a first timid attempt at female emancipation. She left a long pause. Which black dog? The one your twin sister was out with this morning. I have no sister. Balls. I reclined back on an elbow, smiling at her. Where did you hide? I went home. It was no good. She wouldn't lay down the other mask. I examined her guarded face and then reached for my cigarettes. She watched me strike the match and inhale a couple of times, then unexpectedly reached out her hand. I passed her the cigarette. She pecked out her lips at it in the characteristic way of first smokers, took a little puff, then a bigger one, which made her cough. She buried her head in her knees, holding the cigarette out for me to take back, coughed again. I looked at the nape of her neck, her slim shoulders, and remembered that naked nymph of the night before, who had also been slim, small-breasted, the same height. I said, Where did you train? Train? Which drama school? RADA? That received no answer. I tried another line of attack. You're trying very successfully to captivate me. Why? She made no attempt this time to be offended. One realized progress more by omissions than anything else, by pretenses dropped. She raised her head and sat back propped on one arm, slightly turned away. Then she picked up the mask and held it like a yashmak again. I am Astarte, mother of mystery. The piquant gray-violet eyes dilated, and I smiled, but thinly. I wanted her to know that she was getting very near the bottom of the locker in her improvisings. Sorry, I'm an atheist. She put down the mask. Then I shall have to teach you faith. In mystification, among other things. I heard the sound of a boat engine out to sea. She must have heard it as well, but her eyes revealed nothing. I wish I could meet you away from here. She looked up from the ground and through the trees to the south. There was suddenly a much more contemporary tone in her voice. Next weekend, perhaps? I guessed at once that she had been told about Allison, but two could play at false ignorance. Why not? Maurice would never allow it. You're past the age of consent. I understood you were to be in Athens. I left a pause. I don't find one aspect of your antics here quite so amusing as the others. Now she too lay on an elbow with her back to me. When at last she spoke, it was in a lower voice. Your sentiments are not altogether unshared. I felt a jab of excitement. This really was progress. I sat up so that I could at least observe the side of her face. It was closed, reluctant, but it seemed to be acting no longer. Then you admit it is a game? Part of it. If you really feel the same, the remedy's simple. Tell me what is going on, why my private life has to be spied on like this. She shook her head. Not spied on. It was mentioned. That was all. I'm not going to Athens. It's all over between us. She said nothing. It's partly why I came here, to Greece, to get away from what was becoming messy, I said. She's Australian, an air hostess. And you no longer what? Love her? It wasn't that kind of relationship. Again, she said nothing. She had picked up a cone and was looking down at it, fiddling with it, as if she found all this embarrassing. But there seemed to be something truly shy about her now, not just to do with her role, and suspicious, as if she did not know whether to believe me. I said, I don't know what the old man's told you. Only that she wishes to meet you again. We're just friends now. We both knew it couldn't last. We write from time to time. I added, You know what Australians are like. She shook her head. They're terribly half-baked culturally. They don't really know who they are, where they belong. Part of her was very gauche, anti-British. Another side. I suppose I felt sorry for her, basically. You lived together as man and wife? If you must put it in that absurd way. For a few weeks. She nodded gravely as if in gratitude for this intimate information. And I'd very much like to know why you're so interested. All she did was to move her head sideways in the way people do when they acknowledge that they can't really answer your question, but such simplicity seemed a more natural response than words. She did not know why she was interested, so I went on. I haven't been very happy on Fraxos, not until I came here, as a matter of fact. I've been, well, pretty lonely. I know I don't love this other girl. It's just that she's been the only person, that's all. Perhaps to her, you seem the only person. I gave a little sniff of amusement. There are dozens of other men in her life, honestly, at least 3 since I left England. A runner ant zigzagged neurotically up the white back of her blouse, and I reached and flicked it off. She must have felt me do it, but she did not turn. And I wish you'd stop play-acting. There must have been affairs like that in your own real life. No. Once more she shook her head. But you admit you have a real life. Pretending to be shocked is absurd. I did not mean to pry. You also know I've seen through your role. This is getting moronic. She was silent a moment, then she sat and faced me. She gave 2 glances to either side, then one straight into my eyes. It was searching and uncertain, but at least it partly conceded what I had just said. Meanwhile, the invisible boat had been coming closer. It was definitely heading for the cove. I said, "We're being watched?" She made the ghost of a shrug. "Everything is watched here." I looked round, but I could see nothing. I stared at her again. "Maybe, but I'm not going to believe that everything is heard." She put her elbows on her knees and cupped her chin in her hands, stared beyond me. "It is like hide-and-seek, Nicholas. One has to be sure the seeker wants to play. One also has to stay in hiding, where there is no game. There's also no game when you won't concede you've been found. When you have," I said. "You are not Lily Montgomery, if she ever existed in the first place." She gave me a little look. She did exist. But even the old man admits it wasn't you. "And how are you so sure?" "Because I exist myself." "You're her daughter now?" "Yes." "Along with your twin sister?" "I was an only child." It was too much. Before she could move, I had knelt up and forced her on her back, gripping her shoulders so that she had to look me in the eyes. I saw a distinct tinge of fear in hers, and I worked on it. "Now listen. All this is very amusing, but you've got a twin sister, and you know it. You do these disappearing tricks, and you have this fancy line in period dialogue and mythology and all the rest, but there are a couple of things you can't hide. You're intelligent, and you're as physically real as I am." I gripped her shoulders harder through the thin blouse, and she winced. "I don't know whether you're doing this because you love the old man, because he pays you, because it amuses you. I don't know where you and your sister and your other friends hang out. I don't really care, because I think the whole idea is fantastic. I like you. I like Maurice in front of him. I'm prepared to play along every bit as much as you want. But don't let's take it all so bloody seriously. But for Christ's sake, stop flogging a dead horse, right?" I remained staring down into her eyes, and I knew I had won. The feat had given way to a surrender. She said, "You're killing my back. There's a stone or something." Victory was confirmed. I noted those 2 verbal contractions. "That's better." I knelt away, then stood and lit a cigarette. She sat up, straightened a little, and rubbed her back. I saw there had indeed been a cone where I had pressed her to the ground. Then she drew up her knees and buried her face in them. I stared down at her, thinking that I ought to have realized earlier that a little force would do the trick. She buried her face deeper in her knees, her arms enlacing her legs. There was a silence. The pose went on too long. I belatedly realized she was pretending to cry. "That won't wash either." She took no notice for a few seconds, but then she raised her head and looked ruefully up at me. The tears were real. I could see them on her eyelashes. She looked away, as if she were being foolish, then brushed the eyes with the back of her wrist. I squatted beside her, offered her my cigarette, which she took. "Thanks. I didn't mean to hurt you." She drew on the cigarette, normally, not as a tyro. "I did try. You're wonderful. You've no idea how strange this experience has been. Beautifully strange. Only, it's one sense of reality. It's like gravity. One can resist it only so long." She gave me a shy and oddly glum little grimace. "If you only realized how well I know exactly what you mean." I was shown a new vista, the possibility that she had been playing her part under some form of duress. "I'm all ears." Once more she looked beyond me. "What you said this morning, there is a kind of script. I meant to take and show you something. Just a statue." "Fine. Lead me to it." I stood up. She turned and screwed the end of the cigarette carefully into the ground, then gave me a distinctly submissive glance. Would you let me just recover, not bully me for 5 minutes? I looked at my watch. I'll even give you 6, but not a second more. She reached a hand and I helped her to her feet, but kept the hand. And I don't call wanting to know better someone I find quite extraordinarily attractive bullying. She lowered her eyes. She doesn't have to act a being, rather less experienced than you. That doesn't make her any less attractive. She said, It's not far, just up the hill. We began to walk hand in hand up the slope. After a while I squeezed hers, and there was a small pressure back. It was more a promise of friendship than anything sexual. But I found her last remark about herself credible. It was partly her looks, since she had that exceptional delicacy of feature that often goes with a blend of timidity and fastidiousness about physical contact. I sensed, behind the outward daring, the duplicities of the past she had been playing, a delicious ghost of innocence, perhaps even of virginity, a ghost I felt peculiarly well equipped to exercise, just as soon as time allowed. I had also a return of that headlong, fabulous, and ancient sense of having entered a legendary maze, of being infinitely privileged. There was no one in the world I wanted to change places with, now that I had found my Ariadne and held her by the hand. I knew already that all my past relationships with girls, my selfishness, caddishness, even that belittling dismissal of Allison to my past that I had just perpetrated, could now be justified. It was always to be this, and something in me had always known it.